This episode of This Agile Life has been brought to you by BrilliantAgile.com, providing Agile and Scrum training, consultancy, and personnel.
BrilliantAgile.com. Done right, it's brilliant.
This is episode 0 of This Agile Life. I'm your host, John Sextro. My first experience with Agile was in 2001, where we started using XP principles on a project I was working on.
My name is Nate Mackey. My first experience with Agile was in 2003, when we had just had a somewhat failed project for a customer and decided we needed to do things a different way, talked our customer into letting us try extreme programming.
My name is Matt Corwell. I first was given the Extreme Programming Agile book in 2000, and the company I worked at said that's craziness, so put that away. And then in 2005, I switched jobs and was contracting and was on a team with continuous build and all kinds of different wild, crazy Agile practices.
My name is Amos King. Started doing some Agile practices probably around 2004, not really realizing that there was a name behind it. It just seemed to make sense to me. And then in 2006, I started working for a company that does Agile full-time.
So this is the Agile Life podcast, and we're going to kick around a few discussion topics today related to Agile software development. The first thing we're going to talk about today is a blog post from Dan North, where he's talking about what are Agile practices and the opportunity costs that go along with those Agile practices?
Yeah, the blog post is called The Art of Misdirection, and he talks a lot about how spending your time doing practices because you think you need to do them can sometimes cause you not to see what the real benefit that you could be getting out of your work is. So the idea of opportunity costs, where because you're doing one thing, because you've chosen to do one thing, it prevents you from doing all the other opportunities that you could have. And then he goes into, detail on test-driven development and all the different ways that test-driven development is usually considered good, and picking on examples where maybe it's not the right choice.
So I'm just going to go with his example since he talked about TDD. I agree with him that sometimes you don't need to write a test first. Sometimes you don't need a test at all, especially in his example where he talks about just wanting to get something out there because you're not sure if you're even going to keep it. Why spend that upfront cost and time for something that may only be out there for a couple days and then you're going to rewrite it? But the big problem is with a lot of developers, including myself, once you tell me I don't have to always write tests until I have enough experience, that just says, ooh, I don't have to write tests, and then I move on and I don't do it. It takes a very disciplined person who has done this for a while to see where the opportunity belongs and where it doesn't.
Where's the line?
So it worries me.
Where's the line? What's the guideline? Do we only write software with using test-driven when we're going to be writing production code? What's the line?
Well, that's just the problem, and I think I agree with Amos that there's a level of maturity that you need to have to be able to know where that line is, and I don't think the line is defined in a way that you could just simply state this is when you do it and when you don't. I think it's something that you have to feel when it happens. So, and that's part of the problem. Our company teaches people how to do Agile practices, and among them we teach test-driven development. And if people come into a job and they start doing test-driven development and that's all they've ever done, maybe they don't really know why to do it any different or when to do it differently. And I think it could be a real problem for those people to be able to analyze what are the situations where test-driven development is maybe not the best idea.
So I like to look at things of when is this going to fail? Like, is this code likely to change? Is it likely to fail? Is it so simple that you shouldn't be tested it? And have you ever tried to TDD a math formula? it's really hard to prove that 2 plus 2 is 4. And 2 plus 3 is 5. So you're proving addition, stuff like that. So there are a lot of places where whenever the likelihood of this to fail, and because it's so simple, is why take the time to go out and do it.
So if you're new to test-driven development, or if you're new to Agile software development, maybe your default behavior should initially be using test-driven development until you know more or know enough to say, maybe I should think differently about some of this stuff. But by default, your behavior is, let me go ahead and begin with test-driven development. So what does Dan say about, we're talking about this whole thing where missed opportunity cost, right? So if you're a new organization, how do you know if you're suffering from missed opportunities because you don't know what you don't know?
Well, one example is in one quote from the article is, I've seen teams burn weeks of development effort creating beautiful automated test suites that provided almost no additional assurance or feedback over using the application. The reputational cost there is high. They lose credibility with their stakeholders who would prefer to see features being delivered. So that's one situation where if you spend a lot of time creating this test suite, but it really doesn't give you any additional confidence in the application itself, was that really worth doing?
So if the test you're going to write doesn't make you more confident about the code behind it at a later date, it probably wasn't worth writing.
Yeah.
I would say after 6 years of doing TDD, though, I still struggle with, should I test this or not? And I always try to err on the caution of, I'd rather write a test and find out later that it was kind of worthless to write than not have one and find out later that I have a bug because we changed this and we probably should have had a test around it.
Well, I think one of the keys you said there was writing this beautiful test suite. And I think that's where a lot of the line comes in, is that the idea of getting something moving and getting something going forward should come after. I was discussing with somebody today, actually, the analogy of TDD to carpentry. And he said, if I was building a table, I wouldn't stain the wood and make it beautiful before I had it cut and finished and make sure that it was all going to be the right size in the right place. And I think that's a mistake that in that example, people spend a lot of time, I personally spent a lot of time trying to make things as perfect as possible and as beautiful as possible before I got them really working. And I think that to me is where the line comes in, is that when you don't have your basic functionality working, but you're polishing, the stain on the table, you might need to take a step back and reset and look at it in a different way, and that might be a key that your opportunity cost is being missed. And conversely, there was an article that I'd read when we read this one by Uncle Bob, and he said, when should you use TDD? And his answer was always and every single time. He said it's just if you learned another language, and that was something you had said earlier, that is it going to take me more time to write a TDD? And it's a hard skill to build, and it's one that goes up and down. I've been on teams where my skills were real focused, and that sitting down, even something that was spiky, doing it TDD didn't take any longer. There was no more real added value to it than just writing something and spitting a bunch of code out to the page. So that if you actively pursue those skill sets, I might question the fact that there is a cost to writing tests first. That if you get to thinking about that, like if you have a second language, if you're thinking Spanish in your head, or if you're still thinking English in your head and translating to Spanish, you're not native fluently speaking Spanish. Once you get to the point where you're thinking Spanish in your head, it takes no more time to speak that way. So I think that's something to be considered here too, that with the right skill sets or with the right discipline, that on this particular issue, it kind of segues from the article, but on this particular issue, there is not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a cost to TDDing things first if you just get yourself in that right mindset.
So there's probably a ton of discussion we could do back and forth on TDD specifically and the pros and cons of when to do it and when not to do it. But are there other examples in Dan's article of the missed opportunity or the cost of missing an opportunity?
Well, at the end he's got a section on the opportunity cost of tests as living documentation, and that's something we preach a lot. Being able to have tests are your best documentation because they actively, talk to your system and know that your system actually does what they do and they don't lie. But then you end up with the trap of if if you're trying to TDD your system and you find a bug, and so you want to fix that bug, then you're going to want to write a test that proves the bug is there so that you can fix it and know that it'll never be there again. But then you end up with tests that say things, and in his example, a test called should not send email to the back office when refreshing current status. So is that really useful to have in your system a test that verifies that you don't do something when another situation happens? Is that really adding? In fact, that might just add cruft and confusion to your documentation rather than make it clearer exactly what you really need to know. What does it do, and not all the myriad of things it doesn't do. You could write tests all day about what your class doesn't do, and that doesn't really add any knowledge to the person who's trying to understand what it's for.
To me, that's a symptom of when I've come across those scenarios. I would actually go back, fill that test that should not do this, and then use that as an excuse to go in and refactor it and say maybe my original implementation needs some kind of improvement, so I can codify what it does do and use the fact that we have that cruft sitting in there to go forward with it. But go ahead, Amos.
I was just going to say I find it interesting that he talks about writing the test with that name, and this is the same guy who coined BDD. And it makes a lot of sense if you do a lot of BDD style testing that you end up here where you need to. This gets back to when you should and shouldn't test. So I kind of avoid not tests in general. I can, especially at a BDD level, a cucumber level, is I can say I should not see Amos on the page. And I spell Amos with a capital A. But for some reason, our database is downcasing everything, so it comes out Amos lowercase. Yep, you're right. You didn't see Amos with a capital A, but you definitely saw it with lowercase. But I'm still going to say, hey, your test is good. You passed. And so you haven't proven anything with a not.
Right.
So in the case of sending the email or not sending the email, in his specific case, that could be a valuable piece of documentation. It could be. It depends on what kind of code is surrounding it. If everything else is sending email and there's a very specific reason why someone wanted it not to be sent to that back office, that could be a very important piece of information that ends up getting documented via that test. Having said that, you don't typically go in and write all of these tests of, once again, what are all the things that the system does not do, right?
Yeah, well, I think there are some not tests that have value. I mean, I can think of, systems we've worked on where, your permission-based things, for example. So I tried to do this, but I didn't have permission. So I want to verify that it didn't happen. I got an error or that it did not actually flip that switch because I didn't have permission. So you just need to be careful with it seems like.
So that goes back to that is an essential piece of business logic.
Right.
And so the opportunity cost there was high. So what we got back into testing again, but what other things are essential to the business, but the opportunity cost might outweigh it? Like how I'm having a hard time grasping for another example outside of TDD for what he's talking about, even though he uses that as
you could say pair programming, because there are probably times when pair programming doesn't make sense, and to simply say we're always going to do it, then maybe you are losing opportunity for that other person who's really adding no value in a particular situation to be off doing some other productive task for the project. So I think you could look at you could even look at continuous integration and say maybe there are times when you don't need a build for this thing. You don't need to go to the trouble of creating a build for this because you're going to do it once and you're always going to use the same one or whatever it is.
Well, and we just went through that on ours. All of our tests ran locally with Cucumber, and then we had CI running, and it was running on a VM. And if other people were using the VM or anything like that, it would slow our tests down. Timing issues were coming up. Tests would fail, and then they would pass, and then they would fail. And it got to a point where we ignored it for the most part, but we still spent a lot of time on it. And yeah, the opportunity cost became so bad that we grabbed another workstation, don't listen, Nate. Close your ears. We said that we told them that we needed another workstation because they weren't too into giving us a CI box that it was a hard box. So we got another workstation, then we got a Windows workstation also, and those are now our CI. And we if we had done that a long time before, or even thrown our CI out because it wasn't really helping us, but we were still spending time on it, we'd have probably been a lot better off. So that is a pretty good example.
One of the things the Agile coaches in the world always say is, how did that hurt you, right? So not having the CI box, how did that hurt you? Not having the ability to run your CI all the time, how did that hurt you?
Go ahead.
There were plenty of times when we would assert resources to a problem that was just ghost in the machine, basically. That, like you said, if the machine was slowed down and the timings fell out and the database hadn't updated this or the queue hadn't updated that, we would have tests fail, and then somebody would go research them. We're getting off on a tangent about, well, we got to stop our feature and go do this, and we'd be spending a fair amount of real programmer hours chasing these things that were sometimes ghosts and sometimes weren't, so you couldn't just ignore them carte blanche, you know? And so that was a very tangible pain that is relieved by having fixed that CI box.
And when it was up there and it was failing, we actually had stuff that was really a problem, but it got ignored and caught up in all of that cruft of, okay, this isn't really a problem. It's because the VM took 30 seconds to render the HTML, and we only had it set to wait for 20 seconds. And waiting for 20 seconds for something we thought was excessive anyway, especially when running it locally, we have it set to 2 seconds. So the only way to get these things to pass consistently on the VM was to crank that wait time up, and we just kept cranking it up and kept cranking it up.
Yeah.
And all the real problems were getting caught up in the 30 other tests that sometimes passed and sometimes failed. And then because of that, and they were running locally, we weren't catching the problem that whenever I pull, I'm going to have a problem because this test is failing. It was, hey, it's red. Well, it's always red. Move on. And then you pull everything in, and then you're like, whoa, why are tests failing? And then you find out that a long time ago we could have caught this if it hadn't got caught up in that cruft.
So the bottom line to me is, if a team wants to make a decision to not do a practice, because of some situation, I think that's fine. But they should know why they did that, and they should question it. They should continue to question it later. So it shouldn't just be always and forever, we're not going to TDD this area of the code, but there should be a way for them to frequently come back and say, wait a minute, now why is it we're not doing that? And is that still applicable? And how is that impacting us? Or is that good or bad? And as long as they're doing that, I don't think it's an issue. The problem is the teams doing that, having a mechanism for actually questioning beyond like a new person joining the team and saying, wait, what the heck is this? And forcing everybody to ask. But that's the problem I've seen, is that teams don't have the discipline to go and ask themselves, why are we doing this later on, and question their decisions from the past.
That's one of the key outcomes that I expect to get out of retrospectives is, of course, retrospectives being another one of the Agile activities that we use consistently. So in retrospectives, talking about, is our continuous integration working? Is our pair programming working? Is our test-driven development working? Should we consider using Git differently? Should we switch from Maven to Gradle? All of these sort of things that...
Or not do Java.
Or not do Ruby. Or not do Rails. All of these sort of things are the things that we should be discussing in our retrospectives, and I think those are good opportunities and good reasons for a team to have retrospectives, to give you that regular interval of time to take a breath, talk about what things you may be doing that you don't need to do, or that you're not doing that you need to start doing, right? So I think that's a big bonus for teams that are using retrospectives on a regular basis.
Yeah,
and they are team decisions. I think that's very, very important.
Are they team decisions? Are they?
I don't think they can be company-wide decisions.
Not company necessarily.
Every team works differently, and they need to find out what works best for them. That's part of being agile. All these practices, TDD, even retrospectives, I would say. If some team comes along and finds something that works better for them, then they shouldn't have retrospectives. They should do the thing that works for them. And I don't know if you can prescribe that at a company level. I think you can prescribe a starting place at a company level. You can say, hey, when you're a new team and you're starting up, let's kind of do these things for a little bit, and then let you run on your own after you've kind of got your feet underneath you.
As long as we're including customer or product owner as part of team, I agree with
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
Good. One of the hot button topics that, Nate, you started to talk on, but it's been a hot button topic for my entire Agile lifetime, has been the subject of pair programming. And I think that that's probably something that we could do a whole podcast on separately, is just pair programming and when to do pair programming and what the missed opportunity cost could be when you do pair programming or not do pair programming. I think that on a regular basis, I get challenged by people in industry, by product owners, by customers about, why should I do pair programming? Am I not losing, 50% of the productivity on the team because I'm having people pair?
I've told people that when they come up and they ask me that, or they tell me that pair programming doesn't work, I ask them if they've done it. Some of them say they've tried it once. Well, it's a learned thing. You have to learn it. Just because you tried it once doesn't mean that you did it right or did it well. And I've told people, I'll buy you dinner. You come out and you pair program with me. We'll spend 4 hours together, and by the end of it, if you don't feel that it's a good thing and will work for you, I will buy you dinner. And nobody has ever taken me up on it. They all just kind of laugh and walk away, but I really would buy them dinner.
Maybe they just don't like you very much.
Maybe not. I kind of smell funny.
I think for me, the pair programming, having done it regularly for a good number of years now, when I hear that question, I in my head I just think, but don't you know how much more effective it is, and how much better I am? Like I'm actually uncomfortable programming by myself a lot of times now, because I'm so happy with the idea of the extra pair of eyes, somebody's input, the communication, the collaboration, all those benefits from it. I've actually, when I was at working for another company and somebody brought that issue up, my boss suggested we do like a John Henry, like, well, you guys take this feature and you take this feature by yourself, and let's see what the end product looks like. Let's see if it really does take quicker, longer, whatever. And the pair side had the better metrics on whatever it was they were looking for. But just sitting down and kind of like you were saying, offer them to take you to dinner, but saying, hey, well, try it. Try doing this with the pair and doing this without a pair. And I think that if somebody's being sincere about it, from my point of view, they're likely to find the benefits. It's cool. I mean, I don't know.
And I will say that for some people, personality wise, it doesn't work to pair 100% of the time for them. And I think that it could, but it could take months for them to get to that. I have been around those people where pairing for a little bit, they can do it, but then their brain just shuts off after that. And I think maybe easing people into pair programming might be a good way to do that.
Yeah, well, I agree, Amos, and I think there are certain skills that you have to even really be able to do it. John, you wrote an article on our blog not too long ago about the 7 habits of highly effective pair programmers, and one of the ones that I think is most important is communication. It's really, you've got to have communication going on between the two. It's not a silent activity. Pair programming is not telepathy. It's actually talking about what's going on, challenging what's just been done, questioning what's just been done to make sure you understand it. And I think a lot of the folks, even at our company, that don't really get pair programming feel intimidated, or feel like that they're not confident enough to come forward and say, wait a minute, why did you just do that? And isn't there a better way? And that's really key to making it work.
It's hard to sit someone down and give them training on how to pair program. Probably the best way to indoctrinate people is to set them up with a mentor who can spend some time teaching them the right way to pair program. But it's certainly a daunting thing. It's a scary thing for a lot of developers as well, because many developers have been those solo keyboard jockeys for all their career, allowed to make all their own decisions, determine when they're going to take a break and have lunch and and what they're going to work on, and pretty much in solitude and in silence, right? So you're right, Nate. The part about communicating is really important to have that, create that symbiosis between the two developers, and allow them the opportunity to really build off of each other. And I think that there's a lot of great practices you can use to help ease the transition for people into pair programming. But it's a challenging subject, and it's something that I think on first blush for a lot of people kind of scares them.
Well, and then the hardest things there are communication and self-confidence, and they're probably also the hardest things to teach. If somebody doesn't like to talk, doesn't like to be around people, their communication skills probably aren't going to be near as good. And it's a really hard thing to teach. That's something that you kind of have to learn through life lessons. And self-confidence is another thing. Like, it really has to come from you. Nobody can teach you self-confidence. That has to come out of you. And that feeds back into the communication skills, because if you're not confident, you're not going to talk. You're going to keep your mouth shut. You're going to stay back, and probably be easily walked on and not be an effective pair. You're not really helping pair program if you're not talking and you're not putting yourself into it.
So if somebody was not self-confident about their ability to pair program, or they were nervous about pair programming, what kinds of things might you recommend to them as things that they could do to help themselves overcome that initial fear of, oh my God, I'm going to sit down with Amos tomorrow, and he's
everybody feels that way when they sit down with me.
I hear that. I hear that, and he's a really good Ruby developer, Ruby on Rails developer, and I'm kind of new at Ruby on Rails, so what kinds of things could I do? We
actually have that going on right now on my team, and I took one of the guys and actually pulled him out of pair programming. This is the first time I've ever told somebody not to. He is an apprentice, and he's taken lots of notes and following along, and I think that he's ready to take a bigger step forward, but I think he was missing a little bit of that confidence, and him and I had a conversation about this, so I know he's okay if I say it. So I picked a feature that we need to get done, and I said, you're going to do this. And if you need help, you're going to ask somebody else, but you need to sit down. You need to go through the pain and jumps. And at the end of it, you need to know that you did it, so that the next time you sit down with somebody, you can say, you know what, I've already done something. So now I have something to talk about. And so I think that's a good way, but you can't just always work by yourself, because then that fails getting you back to it. So right after this experiment is over, then he's got to go back and he's got to start taking that step forward. And he thinks it'll help build up his confidence, and I think it will too. So I was hoping that will be there. And then we still have, because of that, because we're not pair programming on that, we're doing code reviews on it constantly. So we're still incurring the cost of having an extra set of eyes on it. It's just that they're on there after, so that he can kind of fight through the problems himself.
And I think the biggest thing about what, advice for a new pair in that situation really comes from the experienced pair too, because I can't really change anybody else's behavior but my own. I can offer people suggestions, I can help them, but I can really only affect my own behavior. And I think that as an experienced pair working with a new pair, being aware of if they have communication issues or confidence issues, and kind of taking the lead on that. I mean, you can't handhold somebody through everything, but you can definitely be aware. Like, I've been in a number of situations where either as a new pair or sitting down with it as an experienced pair, thinking, perceiving the other person the wrong way. That I thought they didn't want to communicate and they didn't want to contribute or weren't interested in trying, but they really just were unconfident. They wanted to take 10 minutes to think about the problem, and they weren't comfortable thinking about it out loud yet. And talking through that and understanding that was their point of view, not that they were trying to be a slacker or anything, was a big step. And then being willing to work through with them and, like you say, kind of work them into it. Okay, you know what? We'll take a 10-minute break. You kind of think about this if you want to look at it. And when we come back, I'm going to ask you to walk me through what you've done, and talking about the apprentice types. Today, sitting with one of the apprentice guys, in him asking me questions, I made sure not to drive. I said, I'm not going to touch the keyboard. I said, I'll walk you through this and I'll work this with you. But in my learning style, driving and doing is a great way to figure it out. So I will give you verbal guidance, and I'll sit here with you, but you're going to have to type the commands. You're going to have to hit the keystrokes because I myself am a hands-on kind of learner. So for me, that was me offering an opportunity for him to learn the way I do. Now, I don't know if he does or not. I have not worked with him that much, but those kind of activities, putting them in charge and letting them run the ship, which is what you're talking about with having to go off on his own, as a new pair, I found really useful for myself.
And we've discussed that before, that if your pair checks out and leans back and sits on their phone, your manager shouldn't ask that person why they're on their phone. They should ask the person who's typing, why is your pair on his phone? Why has he checked out? Because usually they've tried to input and you've just said, get out of my way. I'm going to keep going. So, yeah, I mean that it usually is the person who's going, and half the time I would say is the person who's actively involved is the one that's at fault for the person who's not.
Well, and that goes back to the blog post about the effective habits. And I think the big one is as a pair, you're not there, the respect thing, right? You're not there to show the other person how much you know or to monopolize the situation. I mean, you've got to come into this with a pretty altruistic attitude and say, listen, I'm here. I'm committed to this activity. The team's decided this is how they want to go with it. And I'm either going to play ball or not. And if you're not, that's your problem. I mean, that's a mistake on your part.
I think the best thing that I've seen to drive out communication, I mentioned this to you, is we pair switch every hour, which at first was really hard for people. And they realized that the reason it was hard is because of communication issues. It was taking 35 minutes, the whole hour, just to get the guy coming over caught up, because I wasn't really talking. I was just typing away, not asking questions, not engaging my pair. And at the end of the hour, I said, okay, I'll see you later. You're in charge of this now. And the next guy comes, sits down, and says, what are we doing? And he goes, I don't know. So, everybody hated it at first, but it made us realize what communication issues we were having and made us all better pairs. And now there was a couple times where we started going back to like 2 and 3 hours and not necessarily pair switching every hour. And people started flipping out on the team. Even the people who were most against even trying to pair switch every hour went and set up automated tasks that we have a computer that yells at us and says, hey, it's time to switch every hour.
Right side pair switch, left side, yeah. And that's one of those skills that about what things that companies might do to kill Agile. If somebody said to be really effective and to really do pair programming, you have to teams pair switch every hour, I bet you, like most teams, that would cripple a team for just that reason. If you weren't actively working into that and you didn't have a skill set that was built up, eased into that would be something that a team could do that would just annihilate their productivity. I've been on other teams where we said once a day or once every 4 hours, was enough. But with the 1 hour now with the communication and everything, I think that's fantastic. But I don't think it's a skill that I think it's something you could definitely do that would hurt your process if you didn't have the whole team on board and didn't have the skill set in that direction.
Well, I think it'll only hurt you for a short time, hopefully, if you do it. Like it hurt us for the first week. It was horrible experience.
But if a new team were starting off Agile and Kanban and all these different practices and their pair switching was once an hour, I think that I would be really hard to succeed in that scenario. You guys have been a team for quite a while with different Agile practices in place, and you were refining those practices, not starting off fresh.
So don't you get crazy looks from people like, Amos, oh my God, your team switches pairs every hour. My team, we hardly switch pairs, but maybe once a day if we're lucky, or once every other day.
I mean, it's just like the people that say that Agile's no good. They come over and they're like, that wouldn't work, and they don't even want to try it because it blows their mind. But the thing is, those communication issues that their team's probably having, they're not recognizing, because they spend way too much time with one person to be able to recognize that there's actually communication issues going on around the team.
So what do you think the cost difference is between pair switching every hour and pair switching twice a day? Maybe pair switching at like 10 a.m. and 2 p.m.
At first?
No, just overall.
Because at first the opportunity cost is it's horrible to go switch to one. But I think that your pairing is probably less effective. Like there's all these studies on pairing that say that they help you. You actually work more closer to like 3 developers than 2 developers. I don't know how accurate the studies are, but I would say that you're probably losing, for every hour that a pair is working together, you're probably losing, I would say, 30 minutes of productive time, because that's kind of what it seemed when we switched down to an hour. It was about 30 minutes of time were used just trying to communicate what was going on. So you're losing 30 minutes of time at the beginning of every pair switch just to communicate. And the longer that pair switch goes on, the more stuff you have to communicate. So the longer it's going to take you. So I would say half your time you're losing because of communication problems, just because you haven't forced yourself into a place where you have to use them.
And it goes on the other side too, though, because if you get into teams where you're only pair switching once every other day, or even less frequently than that, once or twice a week, like you said, you don't bring to light the issues you might be having with communication, story size, feature size, knowledge transfer, all those other things, which are long-term costs that may not be as evident as, a half hour of people communicating, but can be just as detrimental in the long run to a project success if you're switching pairs once a week, which I've seen, and all these other little issues can get ignored in that week's time, and you get to the end of the project and things are just in shambles because you didn't force that communication. So there's a lot of that cost is a big, is the opportunity trade-off with the long-term problems that can be hidden if you don't switch frequently enough.
So Nate, what do you think? I mean, I've never pair switched every hour. I think it seems like I would spend a lot of time getting up to speed on what the pair is doing. If more time, my team would spend more time figuring out what's going on if we pair switched every hour as opposed to pair switching once a day or twice a day.
Hopefully your stories are small enough that they can be done in an hour.
Right.
So is that are we saying that that's a precondition?
I think what Amos is saying is that once you commit to doing things that way, you change more than just your communication style. You change your process because you see value in reaching a completion point at the end of the hour rather than having to do the knowledge transfer to the next pair.
Well, and the knowledge transfer, you learn how to figure out how to communicate that. Instead of 30 minutes, it takes 5 minutes.
Right.
And you also learn as a pair. You become more effective at communicating and not sitting back on your phone. I see a lot less people on my team now sitting back on their phone than what used to be, because they don't have time to sit back on their phone. They've got to get up to speed. So they get their 5-minute rundown. That communication goes well, but then during the pairing session, they are way more engaged, talking back and forth way more. So by the end of it, they've actually actively participated in communication instead of just being told what was going on. And so they've actually given input into the code and into the communication lines that were there. So instead of just me telling you all of what's going on, you're participating and finding out what's going on.
Okay.
It forces responsibility on everybody on the team to know what's going on. So that, and like even at stand-up, I've been in lots of stand-ups where, okay, this pair's talking about what they're doing, but I'm not going to work on that anytime soon, so I don't really care. And around the room, now at stand-up, you got to pay attention to what everybody's doing, because within the next hour, you're probably going to be working on it. So it brings that responsibility back to the individual developers to know what's going on.
Well, and it prevents the problem you see with, if you don't have a defined switch time, then you end up with the pairs that just stay together for days and days. Having those switch points keeps you from doing that, and it gets knowledge not only transferred from one pair to another, but around the team much faster. Some of those benefits you get from pair programming in general, where people are getting a wider range view of the system and not just familiar with certain facets of it, you get a lot better if you're switching more often. And I just think I've seen a couple teams now that have tried this hourly switching, and if they stick with it, they love it. But it's just sticking with it. I've seen a lot of teams try it and give up on it. And so it's sticking with it that's the key.
Right.
We had to try it twice.
So which
we did it, and then we didn't for a while, and a couple of people switched out of the team. So then I brought it back up again. I was like, no, we should really do this. It's great.
So which comes first, 1 hour stories or pair switching every hour?
1 hour pair switching. It'll drive you to the stories.
Right.
Another great way to shrink your stories is stop collecting metrics based on how many XP or however you
Story
want
points.
to size, story points, however you want to do it. Don't base your metrics for how much you got done in the week on that. Base your metrics on how many stories you completed for the week, because people they want to game the system. So you get a bunch of really tiny stories that are fully implementable, fully testable, fully deployable. And people figure out how to break those things down because they're like, oh, our numbers are going down. Oh, our numbers are going down. Well, we spent one day on a story last week where the week before you got 12 done in a day. So everybody starts shrinking those stories down, off of that and off the hour pair programming, because the very first thing when you switch to hour pair programming is I've been working on stuff for a week and I've never actually done the final commit on a story. I've never said that this story is done. Now, there have been other people, and usually it's not the people that started it, and people get very frustrated because half of the team has never felt that sense of accomplishment that we all are after.
That's a good point.
And so they start complaining. And then, well, as long as you don't go, well, let's start switching every 8 hours, you say, well, what else can we change? Well, let's start communicating better so that we can spend more time coding. Okay. Now a few more people get to commit and get to finish stories, and they're starting to feel good, but still not everybody. And then they're like, well, I did make this story that said I'm going to change username to nickname. Instead of using a password, I'm going to log in with Twitter or whatever. They have a story that has 15 pieces to it. And like, let's make that 15 stories.
Yeah.
And then they start working on it and they go, oh, this really should have been split. Let's make this 18 stories. And now we have 100 points for the end of the week. I think we can get 110.
It feels good to get stuff done, and that there's a very real tangible benefit to that satisfaction of, even if I by the end of the week accomplished the same amount of work as if I'd sat by myself or with one pair all week and done a big story, which it probably would have more, but even if it was just dead even on that, there's such it puts an energy into the team to be getting things done and moving things through to production and deploying things. You know, it's all very Jedi. It really is. Like you said, it's about changing your process, not just the 1 hour pair switch. Any individual piece could probably cause more trouble than help if done by itself. But when you put them all together and you get these different aspects in there, it starts to just be really awesome, and things start to flow. Your Tai Chi is feng shuied.
Since you said Jedi, let's go back to the to the
Tai Chi and Feng Shui.
and one.
I know, he did. He put both of those in one sentence.
So we can get a good nerd analogy here. So Diablo 3 is really popular for people to play right now. So how would you feel if you were playing a game like Diablo? You get experience and you gain levels. What if you didn't get any experience until you beat the last boss of that section, and then you got experience for all of the things that you killed before that instead of as you progressed? That would be really frustrating. I don't think most people would stop playing after a little bit. So if you look at these, every story as experience, even though I accomplished the exact same thing, man, I feel good all along the way of getting there, instead of starting to feel bogged down. Man, I really need to beat this guy because I'd really like to gain my 17 levels that I'm going to get after I kill him when I get all this experience. And so you spread out that good feeling over time, and you probably actually end up with more of that good feeling in the long run because of all these little bitty wins.
That's a really good analogy. I think you need to blog on that.
Oh, gosh. My blog is really horrible. Actually, I just need some design help.
So we'd like to engage the audience a little bit at this point and ask for everybody listening to go out to our website. Let us know how often you pair switch. Do you pair switch every hour, once a day, once every other day, a couple of times a day? Let us know. Check the show notes for how to contact us, and let us know how often you pair switch. Let's move on to, I think, our last topic for the day. Things that teams and companies do to break down and destroy their Agile process. Amos, I think you put this out there for us. Why don't you get us started?
All right. I'd like to start out with fixed scope. So a lot of Agile companies and Agile teams decide that they're going to say, okay, we've got what we're going to do for the week, and it's blocked off. No changes can be made. This is what we're doing. So a little bit of waterfall. I believe there's actually a term for that. What is Nate probably knows the like reoccurring waterfall
Spiral.
Yeah,
I have no idea. I can't remember. So you fix your
So,
scope for this.
so
week,
you
but
do that. You do that because you're in an estimating and commitment type of arrangement with your iterations or your sprints or whatever, right?
Right,
So
right.
you say we're going to get this. We commit to getting these 5 things done.
Well, and even when you're not necessarily doing that, there are some teams who will do that,
Right.
Because
And it's supposed to be a protective thing. It's supposed to protect the team from having more things added to them while they're trying to get these things done.
right. And I think that it's a customer management issue, because if you can make your customer understand that when they want to change something, that it has a cost, and some things are going to come off or slip because of this. Some of the other things, if you want to put this up above something, but like a big thing that I've seen is the customer changed their mind on a feature that was currently within that fixed scope, and we were working on it. But instead of changing it, we said, "Oh, we're fixed scope. We're not gonna move on and do something else. We're gonna continue to work on this, and then at the end of the week, we'll revisit it." And I think part of the hope was, well, at the end of the week, let's hope that they see this and they say that's good enough and they move on. But at the end of the week, that's not what happened. They went, okay, now we're going to tell you what we really wanted. No, you don't even need to demo it to us. This is what we want. Where being agility is we can change at any point in time, but there's cost with that change. So it's a customer management issue of being able to explain that to the customer, not a development issue and a fixed scope issue, because everyone on that team is upset at the end of the week whenever they realize, oh man, we weren't doing anything that the customer actually wanted anymore.
Well, and to me, when teams have done that, it results in marathon planning meetings too, because you feel like you need to know everything about the story in order to commit to it. So you've got to get all that stuff set up front, and there's no opportunity to have that, instant customer interaction while you're working on it, and some great idea about, hey, what if we did it this way? Wouldn't that be better? You lose the ability to really change and make the story better because you feel like, well, no, I don't want to suggest anything because that's going to add more to our iteration and we're not going to meet our commitments. And it, like you said, it destroys the ability to really get the product the way the customer wants it.
Well, fixed big contracts to me do the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just, except for it's fixed big contract, it's usually a longer period of time, but you're very worried up front about what am I actually promising to deliver, to a point that you try to figure out every possible thing, which you're never going to be able to do. And then they want to change their mind in the middle of it anyway, but yet you have a fixed amount of dollars that you're saying, okay, you want to change your mind, but as soon as this money's out, we're done. Or you start eating that cost because you've said fixed bid, I will do what you want, but no matter how long it takes, and here's how much I'm going to charge you for it.
Right.
And so then you start to eat that cost because you couldn't plan everything up.
So we're talking consulting world here now, right? An arrangement between the development group and the customer to say, we will do some set of functionality and you will pay this amount and no more.
Well, I guess
that's what you're referring to.
As fixed bid, I would say, yeah, it is a lot the consulting world, but some companies internally have
A budget.
A budget, well, or they have different departments. So they have a programming department that writes software for everybody. Well, their budget, they usually don't have a budget. They get their budget by another company paying, or another department paying their department out of their budget. That's how I used to work for the Postal Service, and that's how they did it. Is the development department has little to no budget, mainly enough budget to keep the lights on. And then in order to pay their developers, the other departments transfer money from their budget to pay for development.
Right.
So you get into the same kind of thing, even though you're not contractors. You kind of are. You're just contractors within your own company.
Right.
Yeah, but one of the things we always talk about with Agile is you can still have a fixed bid, or you can have a fixed amount of money that the project can consume. The upside to using an Agile approach is that the customer is going to be guaranteed to get a deliverable, right? Rather than if I have a fixed bid project that I do using a waterfall methodology, if I've done a poor job of estimating, planning, and understanding what it is that I'm tackling, I may only get through requirements analysis and half of development before I burn the money.
Well, and hopefully your customer doesn't change their mind so much that you're still writing a login page 6 months in.
Yeah, well, the problem though in talking to customers and during the sales process for us as a consulting company is, even though we say that and we say to them, if you have a fixed budget, we can make sure that the most important features get in that you could possibly buy for that money, which sounds great, but we have found very few customers that will actually buy into that. They want to know what they're paying for. They want some assurance that what they're going to get out the back end is actually what they paid for, And that's the whole problem with the fixed bid, fixed scope, is it's the illusion that if I say in this contract that I want this thing and you will give it to me for this amount of money and no more, that somehow I'm going to get it and be happy. And it is an illusion to do things that way. And as much as we try to, now we have some customers where if we've worked with them for years, we've done several projects and they know what to expect from us, then it's a different situation. They could say, we're going to give you guys, X amount more money and keep this project going. And we don't even need to talk about a deliverable because we know you guys are going to give us the most important stuff as we go. But it's really hard with a first-time customer to talk them into that, even though it sounds good and we know it works. It's just so foreign to what they're used to doing. When I walk in a store, I see an object on the shelf and it has a price, and I pay for that object and I know what I get. And they want to do software contracts the same way.
We may have blurred the line here a little bit, because I think the issue that we were focused on was fixed scope, and I think we kind of got off into fixed bid a little bit. But
I think they're related. I mean, they're
Sure,
both some
related.
kind of cost.
They both have fixed to the name.
Yeah, they both have the word fixed.
Yeah, and they can destroy agility. I think it fits into the overall topic, is that, if you have a fixed bid contract, you can start out agile and thinking that, we're going to get this done in an agile way, and you're going to give the customer flexibility and all those things. But when you get closer and closer to the end, invariably somebody's going to come along and say, well, wait a minute, the contract says we're going to get this feature. And even if you say, well, I know, but you guys traded that for this feature back here, then you've got a problem. And then that fear of that happening, I think, does start to degrade the ability to be fully flexible and fully able to move with the customer.
And that drives you to fix scope then, too.
Yep, exactly.
Because you're like, well, you can't change this because I'm not going to be able to deliver it on time, and I can't work for free for 3 months after this is supposed to be over in order to get it done for you.
So the worst of the two evils in my mind, though, really is fixed scope, because you're, like we've already said, you're locking yourself in. You're not giving the team or yourself as the customer the flexibility to horse trade features or horse trade capabilities, and you're locking into something that may be unrealistic. And fixed bid is somewhat the same way, or having a fixed budget can tend to be somewhat similar. But still, from my perspective, I think fixed scope is kind of the worst of those two things.
And I always try to tell customers when we talk about fixed scope and stuff like that, I'll say, look, I don't want to fix the scope, or even estimating. I don't really want to estimate for you because it's just a big swag. But I will if you want to, but it's not necessarily going to work out that way. Sometimes we run into problems. I will promise you that I will always work my hardest to get stuff done for you, because that's where I find my biggest pride is being able to get stuff done and get stuff done with quality. But sometimes it's not going to happen, and sometimes I'm going to get more done, and hopefully we balance out in the end there. And I think it allows you, especially if you're not estimating, it allows you to, as long as you can have open communication with your customer and your developers, then the act of estimating kind of goes away, because you're constantly talking to your customer and you're saying, hey, we're running into this problem, we're running into that problem. And I've actually had customers come up and say, well, I'm so glad that you told me that, because we originally wanted what you're telling us is going to be easier, but in our head, it was going to be so much harder for you to deliver that we decided to have you do this other thing instead. But if we hadn't had that open communication line, or we had fixed scope, we wouldn't have. We would have sat still and said, we're going to try to bang this out by the end of the week and either release it buggy or not release it at all. And then you have that uncomfortable meeting where you're like, well, I didn't quite make it through everything that I wanted you to make it through. I'm really sorry. Can we make this up next week kind of thing? Or you try to not tell them that you missed the deadline and hope that they don't ask about it, and then sneak it into the cracks next week, hopefully without pushing next week's problems.
Either way, it's a bad situation all around because you're either having to surge and do a bunch of extra work or put in some overtime or possibly deceive or misdirect the customer on what it is you're delivering. Either way, it's not a fun situation.
Well, there's the other side of fixed scope too that we found, which is if you get done early, if it was easier than you expected, and you don't necessarily want to start on something new and be in the middle of it when it's time to do your demo or walkthrough with the customer, or if you don't want to like go and get requirements from them right now because they're not expecting that you're starting on something new, you just get in this weird situation where what's the right move? What's the right next move? Yeah, refactor, yeah. And you always refactor.
One of the things
Let's do Friday. We're done on Monday. Refactor.
But even, you know what, even that's a trap, because if you've got 2 days to refactor, then you might go do something dangerous,
Right.
with that time and go way further than you ever should.
Usually, if I have 2 days to refactor, it might as well be 2 weeks because that's how long it's going to take
Exactly,
me.
exactly. Seen that happen
I'm like,
too.
I got 2 days. I'm going to hit that really big part of the system that the whole thing needs to be.
I'm going to rewrite the entire
Right.
object
No,
model.
rewrite and refactor, not the
Hey,
same
so
thing.
I was thinking, for a lot of people listening, may or may not be familiar with, we're talking about
Nobody's listening right now.
how fixed scope is bad. Nate, maybe can you speak to what the alternatives would be? What the positive sides? What the things that we would do that would prevent these problems that we're talking about? How we would address it, just like a short snippet, so they maybe have some perspective.
Right. So the kinds of things that we've had good success with are what we call just a continuous flow process, where we are working on a fixed number of stories at a time, and we just don't go beyond that limit of what you can work on. And we're always working on the next most important thing. And the other key is that you work on those items until you reach completion. So instead of, having several things in halfway states and just trying to get it all done at the end right before you have your demo with the customer, you work on each one until it's completely done, and then you can move on and open the space to work on something else. So that tends to work a lot better because you've got a lot less in process at any given time. The customer has a lot more flexibility to either add to or take away from that particular story that you're doing. Plus, it leaves the backlog of things that you haven't done even more flexible, so they can reprioritize easily on the work that you haven't started on with no impact whatsoever to the team or the process. So that's I think that is the alternative that's been really successful for a lot of our teams. Is that more continuous flow? And if people have heard of Kanban as as kind of a tool for processes for workflows, that it has those rules about keeping work in progress down to the lowest possible level while still keeping everyone busy, and you can use those ideas to help you accomplish that.
Well, thanks everyone for listening to This Agile Life today. I'd like to thank each of my co-hosts and give them a chance to tell you their Twitter handle. My Twitter handle is @JCSextro.
The same as my Twitter handle is Adkron, ADKRON. Don't ask.
This is Matt Corwell. My Twitter handle is @MattCorwell. That's KORWEL.
One, 2 T's, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Matt,
2 T's.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm Nate Mackey, and my Twitter handle is Nate Mackey, but that's spelled NATEMCKIE. There's no A in the last name. Also, the company where we all work is called Asynchrony. So if anyone's interested in looking them up, that's asynchrony.com, ASYNCHRONY, and also can follow them at Asynchrony.
Great, guys. Nice job. I think this was a fun show. And for all our listeners out there, check us out on our website. We'll post the show notes. And we'll be doing This Agile Life twice a month. Thanks for listening.